Hello, everyone. Juxtaposition here. Today, I want to weave together some lessons that can be learned from the psychological and terrorist operations that we've been subjected to for the last 150 years. I'm going to repost my Dr. Victor Ohta massacre of his entire family back on October 20th, 1970. A lot of folks don't seem to know about that. That happened in Santa Cruz County, in the town of Soquel. It's a very small little community next to Capitola, which is adjacent to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. Spent much time in Santa Cruz with my cousins, and then as a paper boy, I won trips for free to go to the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk and get comped on all the crazy rides, the Fun House, the Giant Dipper, the what was it called, the Mouse Ride, the Wild Mouse. That was the best ride in town. For 35 cents, you could do the Rocco plane, and quite frankly, that was the most frightening ride available. It was scarier than the Giant Dipper, which was a magnificent roller coaster. And the reason why it was so scary is that it's constructed with wooden framing, which had been rotted away by the wind and salt water air, because it's on the beach of the ocean of Pacific. So it was basically required a lot of maintenance that didn't happen. So it was very rickety. And when you're on this roller coaster, and if you're in the rear car where you get whipped around the corners, then you get an extra value for your ride. I think that was a 75-cent ride. That's the most expensive ride at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, was the Giant Dipper. But the Wild Mouse and the Rocco plane offered more thrills per penny. Anyway, that is where Dr. Ohta's family, Dr. Ohta, age 45, his wife Virginia Tobias, age 43, his eldest son, Derek, age 12, his youngest son, Taggart, age 11, his secretary, Dorothy Cadwallader. All five of them were shot in the back of the head with a .38 pistol, like a policeman's pistol, and then they were tossed into their swimming pool in the backyard of this custom-made Frank Lloyd Wright spectacular home, very modern, and which overlooked the Monterey Bay, Fort Ord, the Navy Postgraduate School, and of course the Department of Defense Language Warfare Center, aka Applied Linguistics, Liar Liar Pants on Fire for Foreigners. And they're in close proximity to that area. That's where the International Monterey Pop Festival was held, across the street from the Santa Catalina Dominican Boarding School Academy. That's where Patricia Hearst was going to school. That's where years earlier Abigail Folger graduated from that school before she went to Harvard, to Radcliffe Harvard, and then to Harvard. She went to the Santa Catalina School. And this is where Dr. Victor Ohta's two daughters, who were not murdered. They were not murdered because they weren't home. They were not home. Tara had just graduated from the Santa Catalina School and was in New York City. Okay, and so she would be, approximately 19 years old, 18 years old. And then the second daughter, Lark, who was classmates with Patricia Hearst, same age and same grade. And it's a small school, so that means they're in the same classes together. So Lark was boarding overnight at the Monterey Santa Catalina School, which is across the road from the Monterey County Fairgrounds, which is where it was celebrated in the movie Play Misty for Me with Clint Eastwood, where he celebrated jazz festival going on there at the fairgrounds. That's where Janis Joplin performed, the Mamas and Papas performed. John Phillips had something to supposedly do with the organizing of the International Pop Festival in the Summer of Love, 1967. And there it is, right there, across the street from where Abigail Folger went to school, but had graduated, and where Dr. Victor Ohta's two daughters went to school, but only Lark was there when this October 20th, 1970 massacre happened at 999 North Gulch Road in Soquel, up on the mountain. That's how they had the panoramic view. It's about a mile and a half away from his optometrist office in Santa Cruz. He has another optometrist office in the town of Gilroy, which is on Highway 101. That's a 31 and a half mile distance from his spectacular Frank Lloyd Wright house in the opposite direction, heading east on Highway 152. So Dr. Victor Ohta is quite a busy beaver. Now, I'm going to come back to him in a moment. I'm going to hit the pause button on him, and I'm going to come back to the fact that I'm going to repost the video, which is about 45 minutes to an hour long, on the Victor Ohta story, so I don't need to rehash it here. But I do want to point out some similarities with other CIA-related murders, and I want to get that on the record on this video. But what have we learned, you know? Remember the Maine? Remember the USS Maine, a Navy ship that was moored in the port of Havana, Cuba, in February 1898, when William McKinley was the president. The fake president of the United States was William McKinley. And I guess the United States of America wanted to take over the nation of Cuba, right? And that's what they did. They've been controlled. Cuba is a colony to the CIA since 1898. So what they did is they staged a hoax terrorist attack. You know, kind of like 9/11, right? Kind of like Pearl Harbor, right? Kind of like Sharon Tate, right? Yeah, exactly like that. Exactly, to a T. So somebody, I don't know who, sunk a United States ship moored at the harbor, killing 266 seamen just to throw some toxic emotional poison on this. They actually did kill people. Like 9/11 killed, almost 3,000 people, right? Like Pearl Harbor killed 2,400 people at Pearl Harbor. Like the Sharon Tate situation killed 7 people. Yeah, it's 7. It's not like My Lai, right? My Lai massacre, United States Army, under the supervision of the CIA Phoenix program, they murdered 504, mostly women and pregnant women and children. Yeah, that's a bigger number. That's a bigger number than the USS Maine. It's a smaller number than Pearl Harbor. It's a smaller number than 9/11. It's a much smaller number than Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or fire bombings. But hey, what can I say, man? It is what it is. So some terrorist attacks get more newspaper, fake books, magazines, and television coverage than others. That's the only thing that distinguishes things. I mean, let's be honest. Charlie Manson murdered nobody. Nobody said he did. Not even Aaron Stovich, who was the lead prosecutor in the Manson family murder trial. He never said that Charlie Manson murdered anyone. Never. And he's the prosecutor. And that's what he said. He said that she said that he said, go kill some people. Okay, well, it's kind of like gossipy, but whatever. If you want to buy that, I don't. I don't buy that. Show me some real concrete evidence, right? So anyway, we have that situation going on with every single attack. I'm going to run them through. The USS Maine in February 1898, which then quickly led to the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War? Are you kidding me? It's a 90-day war, 3 months and 3 weeks long. From April 25th till August 12th, 1998, we had the Spanish-American War. But during that war, we constructed a Guantanamo Bay, United States Navy, U.S. Marine base at the east end of Cuba, 45 miles square, 45 miles by 45 miles. So that leads to the obvious question is, hey, what's up with the Cuban Missile Crisis? Why do you need to fly a Lockheed U-2 spy plane like Gary Powers used to fly? How come you need one of those to see where the missile sites are when you have thousands of United States Marines and Navy personnel on the island? Just walk on over. Why don't you just walk over to the missile sites? Why do you need a spy plane? And the answer is you don't need a spy plane. The United States Navy and Marines have total control of Cuba, and that includes during the so-called fake Bay of Pigs invasion of 1,100 to 1,200 Cuban exiles, quote unquote, who go up against, 80 to 90,000, paramilitary forces, Russian advisors, and the United States Navy that's sitting there watching, right? The United States Navy is there, observing. And believe me, the Bay of Pigs invasion was over before it started. I think it lasted, 24 hours to 36 hours, depending on who you talk to. But it just flamed out right away, right? Because they were completely outnumbered and they weren't going anywhere. And besides, Fidel Castro works for the CIA. So you don't need to overthrow Fidel Castro. He's on our side, all right? He's friends with Jose Menendez. He's friends with Frank Sturgis, not his real name, Frank Fiorini. All right, so we had the USS Maine, which basically was the cover story to take over Cuba and build a military, Navy, and Marine base. Then we had Pearl Harbor came along on December 7th, 1941, whilst they're grading the property where Sharon Tate's eventually going to get murdered on. At that time, when the Disney Studios and the United States Air Force are installing a 100,000 square foot underground lair, secret facility off Lookout Mountain Road in Laurel Canyon, technically at the address of 8935 Wonderland Avenue. Google it. It's underground. You won't see it. It's underground. 100,000 square feet, 5 studios. Whilst that's going on, and whilst Benedict Canyon is being built out for military housing of Hollywood for the next 70 years, we have the Japanese Navy that has 8 aircraft carriers, to the United States 12 aircraft carriers, to the evil Russians 0 aircraft carriers, to the Nazi Germans 0 aircraft carriers, and Japan has 8, and they send 6 of them to Pearl Harbor, despite the fact that the United States Navy has an oil embargo blockade in place. So I got a few questions here. How can Japan, who we're embargoing oil to, have 8 aircraft carriers that are not surveilled 24/7 by the United States Navy intelligence? And the answer is, it's impossible. Of course all the aircraft carriers are surveilled 24/7. Of course they are. So how do they get through your oil embargo blockade? Well, you let them through. That's why. You just let them through. So the United States Navy deliberately on purpose permits 6 aircraft carriers to steam over to Pearl Harbor, where the United States Navy has improperly moored the United States Enterprise aircraft carrier and the United States Lexington aircraft carrier simultaneously in the same port of Pearl Harbor, which breaks all the rules of the United States Navy. You never have more than 1 aircraft carrier at a port facility at one time. Never, ever, ever, because they're strategically important weapon systems. So you don't make it easy for an enemy to destroy them. But I'm here to tell you that Japan was not our enemy. They were our fake enemy. So we're going to put on a staged fake surprise attack because it's not a surprise. Not to Navy intelligence. Okay? Not to the bankers that pay the bills for all these weapon systems. It's not a surprise. They discussed this in conference rooms as a conspiracy, as a felonious act. Now, to the people that died at 9/11, to the people that were killed at Pearl Harbor, I think it was a surprise for them. I think they were surprised. The problem is the people who planned 9/11 and planned Pearl Harbor and planned the USS Maine back in 1898, they weren't surprised at all. Mission accomplished. Went pretty much according to plan. They minimized the casualties of Pearl Harbor and kept it under 2,500 casualties. They had 1,100 injured people who didn't die. And at 9/11, they minimized those casualties because they blew up empty buildings. Okay, Building 7, which was the most robust of all the office leases, 100% of the people were out of that building when it collapsed around 5:15 p.m. So you have 0 casualties at Building 7. 0. Nada. And then in the Twin Towers, they were 70% vacant in the first place. So, most you're going to kill is like maybe 10,000 people, 5,000 per building, right? But if those buildings were working at 95% of capacity, there could be like, at least 15,000 to 20,000 office workers per building. So that's 30 to 40,000 people who could have been killed between 9 o'clock and 11:30 a.m. in the morning, New York time, that if those buildings were fully functional, you'd be looking at 30,000 plus deaths. But instead, we're counting the Pentagon, which looked like it had a controlled demolition of the accounting department, and then you took out Building 7 with 0 casualties, and you took out the Twin Towers. Maybe you killed, 2,500 people there. That's not very many, considering what it could have been, right? I mean, why didn't they attack Madison Avenue? What if, I'm just saying, what if 9/11 was moved uptown? You'd kill 15,000 people. No problem. In fact, quite frankly, we know there's weapon systems that can take out 7 million people. No problem. And leave the buildings intact. They can kill 7 million people and leave everybody intact. Back then, think of what they can do today with the 5G mesh and the face diapers, right? And the Medicare-controlled hospitals. Oh, man. They can wipe out 200 million Americans quick like a bunny rabbit. All right, so after Pearl Harbor, we had the Francis Gary Powers fake shoot-down that never happened. We know that's true because they found Gary Powers' driver's license, picture of his wife, his lodge card, his United States Colonel officer identification under his seat cushion, okay? And that's not possible if it was a true CIA mission. So was it a CIA mission? Yes. Was it a mission to spy on Russia? No. It was to have Gary honk out his engine and glide the plane down and land in a farm field. That was the mission. Mission accomplished. And then everyone focused on those evil Russians shooting Gary Powers out of the sky. Re-celebrated with Tom Hanks, right? With the Bridge of Spies. Poppycock story. Just a redo of the Kurt Gentry overflight. CIA mission overflight. He landed the plane. He didn't get killed. He got killed later on August 1st, 1977. Killed at Sepulveda Dam Reservoir over a baseball field. That's where Gary Powers was murdered. August 1st, 1977. In a fake helicopter run out of gas incident. When you can rotate those things down. The helicopter was exploded by some kind of a bomb. Kind of like 9/11. Kind of like Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese did not bomb or torpedo the power grid in Honolulu. How come? If I was going to do a surprise sneak attack, I would definitely take out the power grid. But they didn't. I also would take out the aircraft carriers. But those were pulled out in the days just before Pearl Harbor. I think the Enterprise was pulled out on Thursday, and then the Lexington was pulled out on Saturday, the day before, less than 24 hours before the attack. It got pulled out. Then they made a U-turn, and both of them came right back after the Pearl Harbor attack. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't be blowing up World War I battleships like the Arizona and the Oklahoma. Who cares? Those ships are heading for the salvage yard to get the steel. They have no strategic value in the Pacific. They're battleships. They're from World War I. We're on to aircraft carriers and destroyers. We're not interested in battleships. So you have that with 9/11. You're blowing up empty buildings that are not populated. If you wanted to kill the maximum people, you wouldn't choose the Twin Towers. You'd choose Madison Avenue or some other place in Manhattan that has higher concentration of people than the Twin Towers, which are mostly vacant. They're 70% vacant. Why would you pick them? Oh, they're the tallest buildings. Yeah, but they're empty. They're empty. I mean, if you want to kill people, you'd pick high concentration. So you can see with Pearl Harbor and with 9/11, the goal was to kill the minimum number of people and then maximize and exaggerate the tragedy of it. Now, 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, I think, are tragedies because people died weeks, months, and years later because of collateral damage caused by pollutants, asbestos, God knows what else was in the air that day, and for all the people who returned to work too early that caught up some of the dust particles that were in the windowsills and the wind blows around for months after 9/11. You still have a toxic EPA super cleanup site, right? And you didn't hear Rudy Giuliani say anything about that. Anyway, so then we have the John Kennedy assassination, where everyone's focused on quick like a bunny rabbit, Walter Cronkite, who works for the Masonic Eye, William S. Paley's CBS, right? CBS News. He tells you that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. And he's been working for CIA for 5 years. And so did his father, and so did his uncle in New Orleans with Carlos Marcello. But he doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention that part of the story. He just says, oh, he's a whack job. He's on the 6th floor depository, and they come out with the Warren Commission, and oh, yeah, he did it. He did, just like Charlie Manson. He did it. No, he didn't. He did not do it. And then that went on for a few decades, and we have Oliver Silverstein. Stone comes along with his JFK film, distributed by Warner Brothers and Terry Semel, who's in the neurological science, restructuring your human behavior business, right? Terry Semel. And because people weren't buying into the Warren Commission anymore, and they weren't believing the story that Lee Oswald acting alone did it, right? So you have Oliver Silverstein comes out with JFK, where he repositions the kill shot from the bookstore, the Texas Book Depository storage facility on the 6th floor. Oliver Stone very cleverly repositions it over to where Abraham Zapruder was standing by the picket fence. There's a concrete stairway that leads down to where Umbrella Man is, which Oliver Stone doesn't discuss Umbrella Man very much. And that's where the limousine parked, so that the killer could kill John Kennedy and not kill Jackie Kennedy. Because that, just like Pearl Harbor, they wanted to minimize the casualties. They only, just like in Sharon Tate's murder, they didn't kill William Garrickson, right? And they didn't kill 3 dogs on the property, right? And they didn't kill the 2 dogs over at the Lena LaBianca's mother's home, Corina. They didn't kill the 2 dogs there. That's 5 dogs that didn't get killed. That's one 19-year-old pool boy that didn't get killed. That's very professional. How come Jackie Kennedy didn't get killed? Because they didn't want to kill her, that's why. I mean, could they have killed her? Absolutely they could have killed Jackie Kennedy. No problem. And it looks like they did whack her eventually, with the breast cancer radiation test, right? Kind of sort of like what happened with Jack Ruby, right? Jacob Rubenstein. He got an injection from another Jewish fellow by the name of Louis Jolyon West. He was the last physician to see Jack Ruby before he went off to heaven, was Louis Jolyon West, who works with Abigail Folger's mother, Enos Mejia, who works with Timothy Leary, the LSD maven from Harvard, but who has a shop and an office in Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, right? And Louis Jolyon West working there with Jim Jones, and Charlie Manson for, I don't know, not much. He's pretty busy with Jim Jones. He's pretty busy with Operation Midnight Climax, pretty busy with Timothy Leary, pretty busy with Sharon Tate's father, Paul Tate. He's working with him. You got Paul Tate, Louis Jolyon West, Timothy Leary, Hunter S. Thompson. Who am I leaving out? Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi. They come to town in 1969, right around the time that Abigail Folger, gets bayoneted 28 times with a military M7 bayonet. So you're focused on Lee Harvey Oswald, and you're not focused on Frank Fiorini or Frank Sturgis or wherever he calls himself, sitting in an elevated storm drain by the railroad tracks, by the triple underpass, because he has a straight shot to John Kennedy's right side of his head to blow off the brain onto the trunk, where then Jackie was able to get up in a pink pencil skirt, and grab her husband's brains the size of a softball and put it back in her purse, so she could hand it to the doctors at Parkland Hospital to put back into her husband's dead head. Dead head? Grateful Dead? Does that sound like a CIA hiding in plain view, right? The Grateful Dead were created after John Kennedy's head was blown off. Grateful Dead. Altamont. Woodstock. Abigail Folger resides at 2774 Woodstock Road, right? Abigail Folger's working on Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign when he has his head blown off by Thane Eugene Caesar at the Ambassador Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard. Driven there in a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud by John Frankenheimer, a Jewish man who directed Manchurian Candidate and then took Robert Kennedy on a 60-minute, every bit of a 60-minute, 1-hour drive from the Malibu CIA gated colony to the Ambassador Hotel, which is in a lousy part of Los Angeles. Thank God they tore that place down. It was a teardown. And Robert Kennedy gets shot in the head. John Kennedy gets shot in the head. Grateful Dead. Right? Everyone's focused on Sirhan. Sirhan did it when Thane Eugene Caesar did it. Then we have the Sharon Tate murder, and then for 4 months we didn't know who did it, right? And then they create this fake cover story where some women in the Sybil Brand County Jail say that Susan Atkins said that Charlie Manson said, go kill some people in Benedict Canyon, and then go to a completely different zip code under the Hollywood sign and go kill Lena and Rosemary LaBianca, who live next door to the Straight Satan's defense lawyer. The Straight Satan's defense lawyer lives next door in 2 different homes. One's a 6,000 square foot home. You could put a whole Marine barracks in there. See, but if you're talking about Sirhan, then you're not talking about Skunk Works Lockheed employee Thane Eugene Caesar. If you're talking about Lee Oswald, then you're not talking about a paramilitary sniper team shooting in different directions and the kill shot coming from the railroad triple underpass elevated storm drain, which they've concreted in now so you can't see it how it was. See? It's a diversion distraction. If you watch Oliver Stone's movie, you'll think the kill shot came from the picket fence. It didn't. No way. That would have hit Jackie or involved Jackie where the brains would have hit her head. It would have been a completely different outcome if the kill shot came from the picket fence. The angle is too tight. It's just too tight. The distance is short, but quite frankly, the distance from the triple underpass is not long either. It's about less than 300 feet, okay? You know, it's probably like 250 feet. It's under 100 yards, okay? And the picket fence distance to the kill shot is probably half of that. But a professional sniper can shoot from 1,000 meters, okay? So it's not a problem. I mean, this is well within their accuracy range. You should have 100% accuracy from that distance. So long as the limousine was parked, right? And everybody is supposed to be where they are. And John Kennedy is in a back brace, so he's not going to wiggle around. He's basically, you know, a sitting duck. I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful, but he was a sitting duck. Then we have the John Lennon assassination on December 8th. I believe it was December 8th, 1980, right? And he's killed in the Dakota where Roman Polanski and Paramount Pictures filmed Rosemary's Baby, and he's killed in the lobby. And as long as you're talking about Mark Chapman did it, then you're not talking about CIA operative Jose Perdomo, who was the night doorman, that he maybe did it. But he maybe is responsible because he actually has training, and he worked in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he worked in Watergate, and he worked with Frank Sturgis for years. I'll bet they knew Jose Menendez. Oh, yes, I do. They all came out of Cuba. They all came out of Havana. Frank Sturgis is from Philadelphia, but his assignment was in Havana. That's where Fidel Castro went to University of Havana. That's where Jose Menendez's parents were big shot, you know, friends with the Batista regime and athletes. And that is where Jose Menendez was born and raised, and he left there at age 16. Which is the exact same time that Jose Perdomo, who was chief of police in Cuba, I don't think it was Havana, but, you know, he was 24, 25 years old. Jose Menendez was 16 years old. Frank Sturgis, Free Narini, was like 33 years old. Fidel Castro is like 34 years old. And there they all are, where the USS Maine was sunk years earlier in 1898. There's Fidel Castro. There's Frank Sturgis. There's Jose Menendez. There's Jose Perdomo, who kills John Lennon. All four of those CIA agents are in Havana, Cuba in 1959. And as long as we talk about Mark Chapman, and as long as we talk about Sirhan, and as long as we talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, right? And we talk about those evil Russians that shot down Francis Gary Powers, right? Or we talk about those evil Japanese who sunk the Arizona and killed a bunch of men in their bunks at sleep, then you're not talking about who actually financed, sponsored, managed, and executed these terrorist events. And you have that with 9/11 completely. Okay? Whether you believe airplanes crashed into that building or not, or whether you believe that there were fires and explosions in those buildings, which I believe there were fires and explosions in those buildings before they collapsed. I don't believe any airplane with human beings crashed into that building. I don't believe you can hijack a plane with a carbon fiber box cutter. I mean, that's sort of like believing Susan Atkins with a 9-month-old baby son can chase Abigail Folger around and stab her 28 times to death. That's preposterous. Patricia Krenwinkel couldn't do that. And not even Charlie Watson could do that because he's got a bad knee. And he's the biggest, strongest guy, and he's 23. And he just got out of the draft, conscription, mandatory draft. He got out of it because of a medical injury problem to his knee. So if you fall for the potato in the tailpipe, that's what that is. All these scapegoats, like Caroline Ellison, like Elizabeth Holmes, like Sam Bankman-Fried, those are all scripted CI crisis actors. They're queued up for people that are foolish. You're very foolish. If you buy into that, if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll never find the truth because they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And you know what? With the Victor Ohta case, which I'd love you to go try out, they did that with him during the Manson murder trial, before the trial went to the jury. And they were hearing testimony on a Monday from Roseanne Walker, who was the actual cellmate that shared the toilet with Susan Atkins at the Sybil Brand County Jail. They also brought in Virginia Graham, who knew Frank Sinatra. She's a prostitute sugar baby, friend of Frank Sinatra. And this Veronica, a.k.a. Ronnie Howard, who's younger, who has a drug problem. And they're all in the jail, too, to help corroborate the Roseanne Walker. But Roseanne Walker is actually the cellmate that would have had time to talk to Susan Atkins because they'd be in the cell 23 hours and 30 minutes a day. Whereas Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham, they're maybe only going to see Susan Atkins for 10, 15 minutes per day for, I don't know, a week. So I don't know how much chit-chatting you can do in the community area. I don't buy that. So only Roseanne Walker, who's sharing the toilet with Susan Atkins, would be the credible witness as to what she said. But since she's getting a get out of jail free card, I wouldn't believe anything that any person who's getting a deal from the district attorney, I wouldn't believe any of their testimony because I know it's perjured testimony. It's suborned. It's suborned perjured testimony, either by threat or by inducement, which is how they dealt with Sharon. Susan Atkins was supposed to be the star witness for the prosecution, but she reneged. She said that that Paul Caruso and Richard Caballero bullied her into making false statements. So they couldn't use her. That's why they had to switch to Linda Kasabian, who was a witness to nothing. She witnessed nothing. So you have the witness that didn't see anything was the witness for the prosecution. And there was no defense ever offered. And the judge, Charles Older, was shooting down Japanese airplanes prior to Pearl Harbor. So you have Charlie Manson's hanging judge was killing Japanese people out of Burma. He was killing Japanese pilots and airplanes before the Pearl Harbor sneak attack on December 7th, 1941. That's how Charlie Manson and his judge and his district attorney, Elville Younger, who was also in Burma immediately after the Pearl Harbor attack. Ethel Younger was sent to Burma. They pulled him out of the FBI at age 24, and they sent him directly to OSS Command Center in Bangkok, Thailand, and then off to Burma to make sure all that opium got processed into heroin and air transported back to wherever we're going to distribute it. Nothing to do with Japan. Everything to do with drug distribution. All right, so the Victor Ohta story, they blamed a guy living in a creek bed by the name of John Lewis Frazier. And the news media called it, a hippie cult-like guy, but he didn't have a family. They were really pushing that Charlie Manson cult narrative, and they didn't have a family for John Frazier. So they said, he did it. Like one 24-year-old person living in a creek bed, former automobile mechanic, by the way, who's married, and his wife lives about 10 miles away. But he did it, right? So he's not just a crazy guy in a creek bed. But they made him look like that. And then they think that he killed 5 human beings and a kitty cat, and then typed up a manifesto letter in Dr. Victor Ohta's typewriter, then staged the house for a felony arson, the Frank Lloyd Wright house, burned it to the ground, repositioned the Rolls Royce to the bottom of the driveway, repositioned the Lincoln Continental Town Car to the bottom of the driveway so that the fire department can't get up the driveway, and then made his getaway where he took Dorothy Cadwaller's station wagon and drove it 10 miles north over by the University of California, Santa Cruz campus, which is 6.7 miles away from the 999 North Gulch Road. It's 6.7 miles to UC Santa Cruz, which is a paramilitary campus. And then a couple of miles from there is where Dorothy Cadwaller's station wagon was found. But they arrested John Lewis in the creek bed on the opposite direction, 11 miles south, in Soquel, in closer proximity, about a mile away from where Victor Ohta and his family were all shot in the back of the heads and then thrown in the swimming pool. As if one person could round up 5 people and do that. And then stick around to do the typing and the fire and the felony and the repositioning of the cars. And then I don't know how he got back from UC Santa Cruz to the creek bed where he was arrested 4 days after the murder. And then they blamed him. And then he ended up in the same prison, California State Prison, Ione, Mule Creek, where Charles Watson ended up, where Lyle Menendez ended up. So you got Lyle Menendez, Charlie Manson, and John Frazier, 3 innocent men who didn't kill anyone. Lyle Menendez didn't kill his father, Jose Menendez. CIA did. The CIA killed his mother. He didn't. He didn't. But if people believe it, then, you'll never find the killer. That's my point. That's a home that Elton John lived in. That's a home that Michael Jackson lived in. Would you want to live in a home that Michael Jackson lived in? Are you crazy? They lived in Calabasas. They lived near Canoga Park, where Jose's in the porn industry business, right? For live entertainment. They have offices in Woodland Hills and Canoga Park and Van Nuys. So that's 5 minutes away from Calabasas. That's 25 minutes away from this Michael Jackson, Elton John event house at 722 North Elm Drive, Nightmare on Elm Street. Except it's called Drive. 90210 Beverly Hills, right? All right, so please do watch my my Dr. Victor Ohta movie. There's no way that a guy who got a medical license, went into the United States Air Force, became a junior officer, major status, 4 years in the United States Air Force, then gets out, sets up 2 offices, one in Santa Cruz, one in Gilroy, buys a Frank Lloyd Wright custom home with a panoramic view, has 5 children, 1 dies in its first 9 months of life, has 4 children, sends 2 of them to a $55,000 a year tuition Dominican academy school called Santa Catalina, and that doesn't count food and lodging. I mean, it's $100,000 a year. That's $100,000 a year to send your kid there. And he's got 2 kids going there. And he's a brand new ophthalmologist, maybe 9 years of practice when he gets killed. And he's got 2 children that went through the Santa Catalina school. And he's got He's got a maroon red Rolls Royce, and his wife's driving a Lincoln Continental, the highest level luxury car from Ford. That's where Robin Williams' father, was an executive for Ford. Robin Williams. And I'm here to tell you, people, that you couldn't, I'm a financial expert. You couldn't make that kind of income as a new optometrist. That is a relatively good paying profession, but not to get a Rolls Royce, a Frank Lloyd Wright, have 4 children, send 2 to $100,000 a year private school boarding, and then have Art Linkletter's son be one of your patients, Robert, age 24, and a pair of glasses that look identical to the ones that Victor Ohta sold Robert Linkletter were found next to the steam trunks of Sharon Tate, the unpacked steamer trunks with all of her clothes from Italy, from Rome, Italy, were in those steamer trunks sitting in the foyer right by the front door of the Cielo Drive murder scene, that those glasses were found there and booked into evidence. And do you know that Aaron Stovich, who's the lead prosecutor, not Vincent Bugliosi, he did not admit those glasses, those eyeglasses, into evidence at the murder trial. But you know what he did? You know what he did do? Aaron Stovich admitted the buck knife that they found under the couch next to Sharon Tate. And this weapon was not used in the murder. But he admitted this into evidence. And he did not admit an M7 bayonet, which matches the wounds, that 102 bayonet strikes that match this double edge. This is single edge and 2 wide. It's 28 millimeters wide. It's 2 wide. It's 22 millimeters wide. All right. And then he admits the Ronald Reagan look-alike pistol that was not used, and the ballistics tests do not match any bullets that were pulled out of the victims. There were 7 bullets, no cartridges. And he admits a pistol to make you think that a pistol was used when M7 bayonet and an M16 rifles were used. M16 rifles and M7 bayonets were used. And the bullet is very similar to the .22 caliber bullet. You can use a .22 caliber bullet in an M16 rifle. And they don't want you to think that it's military. That's why they don't want you to think about the M7. They want you to think about a buck knife. They want you to think about Ronald Reagan's pistol. Ronald Reagan's the governor of California. All right? This is 9/11, people. This is COVID. This is the COVID pandemic. They have all these ridiculous parallel narrative cover story conspiracy theories of what did not happen. And that's all the media talks about. They talk about what's not happening. And they completely ignore the facts. They completely ignore the facts, which is every single event that I talked about. The USS Maine, United States Pearl Harbor sneak attack, the Francis Gary Powers fake shoot down, the John F. Kennedy assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, the Jose Menendez assassination, the John Lennon assassination, the Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger assassination. Did the media tell you that Sharon Tate's father worked for Army intelligence? Did they tell you that Abigail Folger's mother was the private banker for Haight-Ashbury, which is a CIA project in San Francisco? Did they mention that? No, they didn't. Did they mention that Abigail Folger's grandparents were ambassadors to El Salvador and had State Department clearances? No, they didn't mention that. Did they mention that her father was in the 3rd largest coffee importer into the United States? No, they didn't mention that. Did they mention that he sold his company to Procter & Gamble? No, they didn't mention that. Did they mention that Lena LaBianca was a military-trained policeman? No. Did they mention that he's racing horses and had 11 racehorses, and that he sees Johnny Roselli often at the Santa Anita racetrack? No. Do you know that he frequents the Santa Los Alamitos racetrack in CIA Long Beach? No, they didn't tell you that. They tell you he was trained at Fort MacArthur, San Pedro, where Sharon Tate's father spent time? No, they didn't tell you that. And the reason that they don't tell you that Lena LaBianca has an Army military background and that he works in close proximity with Sharon Tate's father, and the reason they don't tell you that Abigail Folger's mother works with Sharon Tate's father and works with Timothy Leary and works with a CI psychiatrist by the name of Louis Julian West is because, see, then you'll put it together that maybe those murders were military. since they were performed on military property, and that all the homes in close proximity to that murder scene were all controlled by the United States military intelligence. And if you knew that, then you wouldn't be buying into the Charlie Manson cult family ritual poppycock story, right? You got that with 9/11. There's so many social engineers out there telling you what you think that they happened there. I mean, that's a very sophisticated destruction of three empty buildings. Three substantially empty buildings. The Twin Towers had some casualties, so they were partially full. But mostly empty. They're probably 90% empty at least by the time that they collapsed. So that I call that falling for the potato in my tailpipe. You know, where you think there's something wrong with your engine, and there's nothing wrong with your engine. You have a potato or a banana in your tailpipe. Okay, that's my point for today. So thanks for listening. Please hit the like and subscribe. I really appreciate your support and your ongoing patience. Take care now. Have a great day. Bye-bye.